Momentum is building. People are frustrated. They don't feel like their representative represents them. They don't feel like their party represents them. We have a say in here. I mean, they wouldn't be spending the millions of dollars to get our vote if our vote didn't matter, right? So we do have power in this equation.
Hi guys, and welcome to The Conversation, a Crossing Party Lines or CPL podcast. CPL is a non-profit that facilitates weekly discussions where people with differing views have the opportunity to share their thoughts and feelings about American life and to listen to others so we can better understand why we believe what we believe. I'm your host, Marcus Johnson, and today we're talking about what an America with 6 political parties to choose from would look like. Let's meet today's guest. We welcome David, retired tech executive, spent many decades in Silicon Valley tech, who's a San Francisco Bay native, who still calls that area home. David, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Also, I should have kept going. Host of the Outrage Overload podcast, other podcasts, etc., etc. But a quick intro, that's who he is. We're going to get to know him a little bit better in 60 seconds. David, so the folks can get to know you, what's your favorite thing to do not called work?
Well, I'm one of those people that has way too many podcasts, way too many hobbies, I'm sorry. And podcasts are some of them. But yeah, I guess now that I have a grandbaby, maybe my favorite thing is just getting time with my granddaughter.
Great answer. And what's your go-to movie, TV show, book, piece of media?
Our sort of go-to, like wind it all down, is we watch some episodes of Bob's Burgers.
Oh, very nice. I've not watched that yet, but I know it's very popular. And finally, what's one goal you're working towards this year?
Well, for this year, I'll mention a goal about the show. So, for Outrage Overload, it's something I've sort of struggled with since day one, is kind of keeping this balance of keeping sort of calm, but also energizing and interesting and also having some tension. So like just trying to make sure it's not just kind of doesn't come across as kind of a mushy, safe thing. Sometimes maybe not always playing it safe.
Balance is hard. And you want there to be a bit of conflict. Conflict's a bad word, it seems, these days, but conflict actually should be a good thing. You should be able to disagree and push people on their thoughts and change your opinions. So, yeah, I like that. So that's our guest for today. David, thank you so much for joining the show. Today we are talking about if there were 6 political parties, which one might you choose? So let me set the table here quick, David. A New York Times opinion piece, Jesse Wegman, a member of the Times editorial board and Lee Drutman, author and senior fellow at Public Policy Institute, New America, argue proportional representation could help fix America's two-party system. They describe it as an electoral system that awards seats in proportion to each party's share of the vote, expanding voters' political options. Why is this important now? In 2024, fewer than 10% of US House races were competitive. Fewer than 10%. They acknowledge in the piece. Geographic sorting, Democrats in cities, Republicans in rural areas, reinforced by partisan gerrymandering, have left most districts safely Democrat or Republican, reinforcing political polarization with each election. The heart of the problem, they argue, is the single winner districts, giving 100% representation to a candidate who gets the most votes and 0% to everyone else, winner takes all. Winners push their agenda whilst they hold power. Losing parties often refuse to work with the other side, with neither side incentivized to compromise. And so an example of what proportional representation might be is right now, if the Democrats get 60% of the vote and the Republicans get 40%, then Democrats get the seat. And those who are Republican get nothing, 0 representation. And an election with multi-member proportional representation, using the same vote share, 60-40, would mean the district would elect 3 Democrats. One would have 20%, one 20%, one 20%. Those 3 get 60, added up. And 2 Republicans, there would be one with 20, another one with 20, and those 2 together would make 40. The district has a Democratic majority, but voters who prefer Republicans still get represented, and in proportion to the share of the voting population. That is proportional representation. David, voters vote, they say in the piece, as they do today. But because elections include multiple members, several candidates can win seats. Lowering the threshold for representation makes more parties viable, giving millions of voters more choices that better reflect their priorities. What would that look like today, they asked? What parties might there be? Well, the 2 gents who wrote the piece analysed data from Nationscape, a large survey that polled hundreds of thousands of Americans on their political preferences and distributed voters among 6 hypothetical parties. So 6 parties: the Progressive Party, the New Liberal Party, the New Populist Party, the Growth and Opportunity Party, the Patriot Party, and the Christian Conservative party. So now you pretend you live in a world where it's not Democrat or Republican. You live in a world where you have 6 options. The Progressive Party, they're on the left. They emphasize equity and racial justice, bringing a vision of inclusive social democracy. There's the New Liberal Party. They are center-left, and they are pro-market while still holding liberal social views. There's the New Populist Party, combines economic populism with moderate views on cultural and social issues. Then you have the Growth and Opportunity Party, socially moderate to liberal, market-friendly Rockefeller Republicans, named after Nelson Rockefeller, the former governor of New York and VP of the US. And then the last two, the Patriot Party on the right, they carry the America First agenda, where they focus on tight immigration and protectionist, yet more centrist economics. And then the Christian Conservative Party, lastly, further right, they argue for limited government, national government, emphasizing religious liberty and biblical morality. Okay, that out the way. And thank you for letting me set the table. There was a lot there. David, what were your main takeaways from this piece about America potentially having 6 political parties to choose from?
Yeah, well, I do want to preface this a little bit that I'm not a political scientist, right? I certainly don't have all the answers, but and I do talk to a lot of experts about this
Unbelievable.
stuff.
That's the only reason we brought you on. Figure it all out for us.
A pretty good knowledge about civics and history, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of make sure that it might be, I don't want to overstate my expertise on this, but
absolutely.
And these guys are well known, obviously names in these kind of things, and particularly in sort of bridge building and sort of looking at these problems. Mm-hmm. So, again, I'm not going to say I know more than they do, but anytime I see one of these things that sort of blames all of our issues of this sort of the crises that we're in on sort of one thing, I was a little suspect of that. So I think if you just look at any one variable, even if it's structural, like the winner take all, it's usually an oversimplification when I find it. So I think there's more at stake here. So I disagree with the premise a little bit if we talk about that winner take all is the entire problem. That said, it's a big problem, right? It is a big problem. It helps lock in a lot of these toxic dynamics that you talked about in the opening, and that we are talked about in the piece, and that we talk about a lot on my show.
Yeah. Current 2-party system, it's always, ever since moving to the States, it's always felt to me like it's odd to have just 2 choices for 330 million Americans, or call it 270 million adults who can vote. And so when I look at this, I see a chance for people to feel more represented. When you look at this system versus the old one, what would you say about the old one that actually might be a bit misunderstood, perhaps?
Well, I'm certainly not arguing either for our existing 2-party system, but yeah, I think some experts do talk about how a multi-party system doesn't necessarily fix everything either. They have their own challenges sometimes.
Absolutely,
you can get into a situation like we've seen in Britain with how many prime ministers in 8 years, whatever it's been, right? You sort of can have that kind of a problem. It can be difficult to build coalitions.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you could see it as a problem. And I think a lot of people do. When the prime minister leaves, they think, oh, what's gone wrong there? Must be a catastrophe. But what I like about that system is that you do have the chance to say, if the leader, as the party, you do just get a chance to say, as what's going on with Keir Starmer right now, our prime minister, former prime minister, he's just stepped down after 2 years. They said, you're not doing the job that we hoped. And so we're going to replace you. And you can get replaced mid-term, which I really appreciate, because it means that just because you got voted in doesn't mean you get to rest on your laurels and just serve out your term because it happens to be 4 or 5, whatever years. You need to make sure you're doing a good job. Otherwise, the people and the party might turn on you and say, we're going to get a fresh perspective in here. We're going to get somebody else in.
Yeah, right. We have quicker referendums, I guess, right? In terms of the multi-party and our 2-party system, I think one thing we should keep in mind is that multi-parties alone, especially in our system where we have parties already, right? There are more parties. We just barely know them, and they have no power, and it's very difficult to get anywhere. So it's not like we don't have parties. It's just that the 2 parties really dominate, sort of structurally. It's very difficult to do very much as a third party. But so if we get past that's a structural reform we have to figure out right there, right? But I think the other side of it, even having, like the 6 parties they recommend or some other sort of model with multiple parties, I think we're going to need some of these other reforms. And again, I don't know exactly what they all are. I mean, I think the ones they talk about are worth looking at. But I'm also a pragmatist. So I often think about, like, what's the pathway to get there? Because it's easy to sort of hold up a sign and say, I want this thing to happen, and, end Citizens United or whatever it is. But if you can't come up with a pathway to get there, it's sort of, you're just shouting into the void. So I think about these things like that. And so I do think it's going to require sort of both. We need some structural reform, somehow get better proportional voting. Like, there's different models, ranked choice voting. There's other things. There's all the things that they're talked about in the article. And I do think that's a piece of it. And I think that's what could enable, more parties. But there are some real structural barriers to third party. I mean, I sort of joke that the only thing the 2 parties agree on is they don't want any third parties to have any power.
It does feel a multi-party system, in theory, can make Americans feel more represented. Like reading this, that's kind of one of my takeaways. And I read another study as well from Pew Research, which we'll get into a bit later. But it did feel as though Americans want something that heads in this direction. And it seems that Americans have wanted more parties for a while, particularly a third party. Gallup found support rose from 40% in 2003 to 60% in 2013. And that's where it stayed. And when you break it down by parties, 75% of independents want a third party at least. 58% of Republicans, that's gone up quite a lot recently, and 46% of Democrats say a third party is needed. A big part of this as well, my second takeaway from this was something that I've known in the UK for a while because of the system we have here, but it opens up possibilities of new political coalitions. And I wonder what you think about that. Like, do you think, I was thinking it kind of sounds nice. Basically, parties would work together to pass legislation. So, for example, the New Populist Party, they might work with the Growth and Opportunity Party on socially conservative issues, but then they might turn around and team up with the New Liberals on economically liberal policies. And so there would be this kind of like getting together to work together on certain things, depending on how many seats you have and what policies you want to prioritize, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a reality in this very divided system? Do you think if people got into these new camps, that they would still be very opposed to working with anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely take like a cultural shift, because we have become quite tribal, which I think is a big part of our problem is, we're identifying, with these parties. But I think the fact that in addition to the stats you highlighted, I think also the fact that there's so many people sort of unwilling to take on either the Republican or Democratic pin or label, and they refer to themselves as independent, even if they usually vote, or almost always in most cases vote one way or the other. They don't really want the label, which means they don't feel very, very represented. They feel there's like this idea of politically homeless and all that. So I think that's just another stat that shows, that I think some of these ideas have some support. But yeah, to your question, I think this is part of the challenge too, is right. Would the factions just sort of break up differently? Would you still find this identity? I mean, Americans right now have really made building coalitions kind of a bad word, right? You're somehow sacrificing your moral, righteousness to even think about building. We don't compromise. We never compromise, and so then what happens, of course, is we get this gridlock like we have now, because compromise was really how this country was built. I mean, the system is designed to require compromise, right? So yet we don't want it. Like, we don't like compromise. So we vote these people that say I'll refuse to compromise, right? So we get what we ask for. And that's why I think things like ranked choice voting and some of these other ways of doing more representative voting in the electoral process is important, because then people, I think, can feel more agency. I mean, right now, a lot of the voting happens in the lesser of evil kind of thinking, right? And that makes people feel like they don't have as much agency, because we're very seldom voting for what we want. We're usually voting sort of to avoid some harm we don't like.
Yeah, there was this really interesting piece basically saying the situation we're currently in has led to Americans hating the other side even more than they like their own. So there was an October 2020 study published in Science magazine titled Political Sectarianism in America. And William Cooper, who's a contributor for the national nonpartisan news site The Fulcrum, he was writing that this explains a lot. When you hate Trump viscerally, it makes his opponent, Harris at the time, seem like a better candidate than perhaps she really is, and vice versa. And so it does seem like that's where we've gotten to, is that you just have to make the other side look worse, and you don't really have to do much in terms of building out a manifesto and explaining to folks what you're going to do for them when you get elected, if you get elected. I did want to touch on something you said. Mr. Drutman, who wrote one of the authors of the piece, was saying to what we were just discussing in terms of it being kind of a cultural shift, trying to break away from this, I'm not going to work with anybody else because that would be somehow wrong, or maybe un-American perhaps. I don't know, maybe that's too far. He was writing, we have two truly distinct national parties organized around two competing visions of national identity. In a democracy, we need to be able to agree to disagree and agree on a fair process to resolve what we disagree about. And this links quite nicely with this other point. Matthew Luttig writes in the interdisciplinary journal Politics and Rights Review, and he says to be a Democrat or Republican means to have core characteristics of who one is and what one believes, defined and spelled out for one by the party organization. American political parties today provide clear messages about what it means to be a Democrat or a Republican. In his book, The Closed Partisan Mind, he writes about cognitive closure cognitive closure, the ability to seize and freeze on some belief or aspect of the world. He explains religious groups and belief systems are known to offer cognitive closure about life's mysterious questions. Today, America's political parties are similarly describing beliefs and secondary identities that make it easy for supporters to seize and freeze on questions about what they believe and who they are. So Democrats are pro-choice, anti-gun, care about the environment, inequality. Republicans are pro-life, pro-gun, unconcerned about environmental issues and the wealth gap, etc., etc. What do you make of that? Do you think that it's become so much more about identity and that to break away from that is going to be maybe too much to ask?
I do want to note that the fact that you mentioned the political sectarian paper is interesting because that paper is kind of one of the foundations that got me to start the podcast. That was kind of
interesting.
basis of what the whole thing was about.
Oh, wow.
And I had Peter Ditto on as one of my first guests, who was one of the authors of that paper.
Okay. What was it about, really quickly? What was it about it that kind of inspired you?
It was really a new framing of the division, right? Pretty much as you stated it. But yeah, it was that new framing of the division as really, where our division is more like religious sects than it is like a political debate.
Yeah.
We don't see the other side as the wholesome adversary. We see them as like bad people. So not only do they have bad ideas, but they're bad people with bad intent.
Yep.
And that really opened my eyes to a lot of what's going on.
But please.
Yeah. So the identities thing is so strong that the issues are almost sometimes not even what really makes people identify with these parties. I think there's a good book that talks about this called The Myth of Left and Right by Hiram and Vernon Lewis that really talks about how neither party really has principles. What they have is tribal attachment. And people will change their issues if the tribe changes,
yes.
right? And we've seen this over time. So I think that trying to tie it up to issues is sort of that describes these parties today. It doesn't necessarily describe them sort of forever. And trying to find the underlying principles underneath can be a challenge. I mean, if you just look, I want to be careful not to pick on like one side does this more than the other because both sides does it. But a recent example is sort of, a lot of the ways that what would have been a Republican 15 years ago or 10 years ago with what Trump has driven, a lot of that is different. Like they're not exactly holding the same values they held then. They're willing to adapt to stay in the tribe, to be part of the current tribe. And the tribe looks like this now, so we'll be on board with that now. And the Democrats have done the same thing over decades as well. So there's also this group that says, I don't want to be that anymore, right? So we have this idea of this exhausted majority. So people are very attached to these identities. And I do worry in these third parties because I think any third party or six parties, they're going to need a little bit of that, right? Because we like some validation. We like to know other people see the world the same way we do, and our way sounds good. So any other party that is going to need a little bit of that at least. I mean, I think this was a big problem of like Madison was worried that would be too powerful of a thing, and I think that's where we are now. But we're also humans, and we need that validation a little bit, right? Yeah. So there's a balance there somewhere that you need a bit of that attachment. You have to find a thing you can be attached to. Like, if when I take the Pew Research Center's quiz and I get an answer at the end, like I don't love the answer because I don't feel that way 100%. Now, I know that that's not how those quizzes work. They're going to bucket you with the closest one.
Yeah.
But the labeling, like, oh man, I don't like the labeling at all kind of thing, right?
Yeah. So to what Dave is referring to, non-partisan American think tank, Pew Research Center, just released some research called Beyond Red versus Blue, Political Typology. 9 groups show the conflicting values underlying today's polarized politics. So the report explains that many folks likely feel that Americans hold a complex mixed values and beliefs that don't always fit neatly into either major party. And so Pew grouped Americans into these 9 political types using the quiz that David referred to. I'll put a link in the description so you guys, if you want, you can take the quiz and figure out where you land. It's based on attitudes towards government, economics, immigration, culture, foreign policy, political institutions, not party identification. And the results are a lot more nuanced than just left or right, red or blue. The groups on a spectrum range from dark blue, leftward progressives, to the lighter blue, loyal liberals, and then you go across some ones in the middle, and then lighter red, faith-first conservatives, to the dark red, no apology right. However, it's interesting, David, because we've been told through having a two-party system that there are 2 types of people, this side, that side, and maybe the people who don't vote, because that is also a lot of people, even though they might identify on one side or another. A lot of people have just pulled back from this, but it'd be easy to think that if you went to America, everyone is going to be wearing a blue jersey or red jersey. However, the foremost ideological groups, so the 2 on the left and the 2 on the far right, only accounted for 38% of Americans. The remaining majority, 62%, belong to the five less ideological, more internally conflicted groups that live in the in between. What were some of your thoughts or takeaways from that political typology report?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very informative. It's nice to have that, that kind of data out there to help break some of those stereotypes that we only have two types and
Yeah.
we're all either, red or blue or whatever. It's so ingrained in us, this idea of framing everything kind of left, right, red, blue. So I'm still a little bit bothered that they kind of still use that underlying framing, even though they've turned it into 9 buckets instead of one, because we're often doing the same thing along this, as if everything is some kind of linear scale and you're one way or the other towards the other thing. And I think it's much more three-dimensional than that, or at least two-dimensional rather than one line. And I think that's a reality that we struggle with because we want to frame everything in this left-right thing. But no, I think it's quite helpful to have those kind of things when you have, sort of a heterodox pluralist society. That's to be expected. And that's good to know that exists because, again, you get a little validation that, like, I'm not the only one that doesn't quite feel that I belong on those two far end spectrums. And again, like I said, you have so many people claiming to be independent that would rather hold the label independent that I think that says a lot of it too.
Yeah. One of the takeaways I thought from the piece, which was interesting, was just how evenly distributed people were across those 9 different political types. So apart from one, each group had roughly 9 to 12%. So they were all broken out. But each bucket, leftward progressive, law, liberals, order and opportunity left, left out left, tuned out middle, pragmatic and polite right, unconventional right, faith first conservatives, and the no apologies right. The biggest group was the order and opportunity left. They had 18%. Every other group had between roughly 9 to 12%. So I was surprised to see how evenly distributed it was. That said, second takeaway was Americans don't feel represented because 1 in 4 Americans think neither political party represents the views of people like them. 1 in 5 think neither political party cares about them. And between 25% to call it 40% of the middle groups, kind of there's 1, 2 on the left, 8, 9 on the right, kind of those 3 to 7. 25 to 40% of them said neither party represents views of people like them. What I also found, David, though, was that Americans are much more closely aligned on hot button issues than expected. There are only 2 groups, which only made up 21% of Americans, the no apologies right and the faith first conservatives. Only those 2 groups, 21% of the people, sat on the right side of the fence on some of the hot button issues like open carry, American culture being based in Christian religious beliefs, abortion being illegal, and also open carry. Faith first conservatives were close to the fence, only just on the right hand side of it. And so it was interesting to see that people do, even though they're in these different groups, they do align quite closely and do actually want a lot of the same things, which I think is something that a lot of Americans wouldn't expect.
Right. And I think there's some groups that try to highlight that and bring it out. I mean, we have to be careful to not say it's like kumbaya, we all get along, all get along because we agree on anything. We definitely have differences.
Yeah.
There definitely are value differences, and there's some things that we see differently. And there's issue salience differences too, right? Like some people may not be that interested in what immigration one way or the other that much, and that can almost be a problem too, right? Because they don't see why other people are so upset about it, that kind of thing, right? So you can find yourself in that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of perception gaps about that. And the politicians kind of want that, right? I mean, the politicians take advantage of that. They want us to feel polarized on issues as well, because again, that gives us a little bit of a moral standing to say, yeah, we're the ones with this view on issues, and ours is better than theirs, kind of thing, right? So, and that gets me to a big problem that we're dealing with here too, is that the people that would be making these changes are the same ones that benefit from it. So again, as a pragmatist, I come back to what's the path to make some of this happen. And I think there's lots of other research showing similar things, like the Beyond MAGA study. You may be aware of that one. And there's some things in there where I think a lot of liberals would be surprised to find out that warmth towards legal immigrants is about the same between all the groups from far right to far left. Well, not the farthest right. I think the farthest right jumps a little bit, but everybody else was about the same for the warmth toward legal immigrants. And the big change is what illegal or undocumented immigrants was, where the difference was. And I think most liberals, they wouldn't believe that, right? Like that study must have made an error, right? But I think that also explains why even some people on the right, are saying things like ICE has gone too far and things like that, right? Because they have some of the similar values and some of that people might be surprised by.
Yeah, it just kind of reminds you that just because we're put into a group doesn't mean there aren't groups within that group. Right. And you sent me this. I thought it was really interesting. So it's Beyond MAGA, and it basically is saying that there are different groups within the Make America Great Again coalition. And you've got the MAGA hardliners, the core, you've got the anti-woke conservatives, politically engaged, relatively well off. You've got the mainline Republicans, kind of middle of the road conservatives, play by the rules, expect others to do the same. And then the reluctant right, the most ambivalent cohort of Trump's coalition. Friend of mine who I was talking to on a show recently was saying about, we were talking about Hispanic folks, how the population has grown, how advertisers can reach that group. And he was saying to me, as someone who's Hispanic himself, is that there's a lot of different groups within that. And so labels can be helpful because they can help us segment different things and target different people. But we'd be remiss to forget that there are groups within those groups within those groups. It's rare that you'll ever fit neatly into any bucket, or at least one bucket. I want to go back to what you were saying about being a pragmatist and like thinking about how difficult easy this would be to change. In the piece, they suggested that it would be very easy to change. They said the law could be changed to allow for proportional representation in America tomorrow if people agreed that that's what the way they wanted to go. They were saying all you have to do is cross out 4 words and add 5 new ones to the law. Maybe this has been incredibly oversimplified, but maybe it isn't as difficult as people might think. But to your point, the powers that be, it wouldn't necessarily benefit them. That said, people become disillusioned enough, maybe it would benefit them to be ahead of the curve here.
Right. I mean, I think some of these other things we've cited with, that most people aren't on those extremes, that a lot of people want to identify as independents, that I think all of those things add up to an environment that may enable this kind of stuff, or some of these kinds of things, or a pathway to stepping stones to get there. But I mean, one thing to remember about the electoral system in the U.S. is that it's managed by states and it's separately, right? So the government doesn't really mandate. They could allow, like I think that was the word that you used, they could allow some of these different things, but they can't mandate it, right? Because elections are run by states independently. Mm-hmm. And that's why some states have ranked choice voting and others don't. So,
right.
I mean, I think a lot of constitutional scholars would have a problem with mandating some of these things at the national level. And I think that could be really hard to do because that's very much in the Constitution. That's right there, that states run elections. But like I say, I think there are pathways to get some of this done. And I think is the will of the people there. I think it's building. There was a will of the people to at least try things. I mean, Maine has tried ranked choice voting. Alaska has tried it. Some others have started to do it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do worry that we're going to have to put a lot of pressure on these candidates. Like the only reason they're going to do it is if they feel not doing it is more dangerous than doing it. So, that right now the system helps them win. We're going to have to show them how not doing it's going to help them lose.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. What's surprising, though, is when you zoom out, is you realize, as they say in the article, they were saying the US is one of 4 stable-ish presidential democracies in the world that use winner-take-all systems to elect their legislator. The other 3 are Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. And so a lot of other developed countries did used to use this system and have since moved on. No one's found the perfect system, but the point being, there are other ones to try.
100%. I mean, and some states already do this a little bit. Now they can't change the number of House of Representatives and things like that.
Right.
But Maine, I think, splits their electoral college votes for president. I mean, there's separate elections for all these things too. So there's a lot of different kinds of elections happening out there.
Yeah.
And I think a couple of other states do that as well, where they have like 3 electoral votes and they split them out like 2 to 1 kind of thing, right?
Yep.
But again, that's the presidential election only, so it doesn't really affect much else anywhere else. But that's why I do like the idea of just kind of doing them in small parts. I think it's going to be difficult to kind of make it all happen at once. But I don't know. I could be wrong on that, right? I mean, this momentum is building. People are frustrated. People are not feeling represented. They don't feel agency. They feel like you cited some data about, they don't feel like their representative represents them. They don't feel like their party represents them. And they're struggling too. So maybe, that kind of a coalition could be built. And I think that's what it's going to take, though. I'm going to have to see, again, being sort of the skeptic and pragmatist, I'm going to have to see those kind of coalitions starting to be formed, because it's maybe because I keep my eyes a lot on the polarization side of it, in the toxic polarization environment we're in. Maybe I'm getting biased that way, where I'm not seeing as much of these other types of coalitions being built. Although I do try to look for that, and I do also try to highlight it on my show when I do see it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I'm totally open to the idea that some coalitions like that could start to be formed. Because mostly what I see is people saying, I don't want a coalition with anybody, man. I've got the right way of doing it. I don't want to compromise on anything.
And I think that's what's frustrating people, is that of all of the wonderful ideas that Americans have and ways that they think we can come to solve problems in this country, because that's what politics is supposed to do. It's supposed to come to solutions and compromise along the way, but figure out things to make life better. To just be presented with 2 options, it kind of feels a bit offensive almost that, why would you only have two ways of doing things, especially in a country where there's a whole aisle of choices for cereal. I can pick, there's about 1,000. When I moved to America, I couldn't believe how many options of cereal I had. Americans, for the most part, seem to, they really like the chance to customize things, to choose from a range of options. I'm not just going to have a packed sandwich. I'm going to tell the guy over the deli counter exactly how I want it. So considering how much choice people get in other parts of their life, or their political life, to be reduced to just, one or the other, left or right, seems kind of bizarre to me. William Cooper, the contributor to the Fulcrum, was saying that a more diverse set of political parties would invigorate mainstream political discourse with additional points of view. And that's like, it's not necessarily we need more parties. It'll be nice to have additional points of view, saying as today, many important ideas don't make it onto the platforms of either side. The introduction of new ideas and coalitions would reduce rigid partisanship and provide incentives for politicians to respect empirical reality and not just reflexively appease their constituencies. Mr. Druckmann, who we've mentioned before from New America, saying multi-party system would be more fluid and responsive to Americans' political preferences, helping to dissolve our binary partisanship. And so really it's about being able to put more ideas in front of people.
100%. I mean, I'm definitely not opposed to the idea. My difficulty is getting there. I know the structural barriers to trying to get other parties in the game. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get on ballots. There's lots of reasons why the two parties really dominate. But I do think it's not just that we have just two parties. It's also that we have these strong factions and that we have the winner-take-all system. I think those things combined, creates a lot of these problems, combined with some of the other aspects you talked about earlier, like the sectarianism sense, the affective polarization, the tribal nature. I think all of those things are sort of root causes for the mess that we're in. And so many people are incentivized to continue this system, right?
Yes.
It's going to take a lot of energy. And it's not that it can't happen. I mean, we've overturned other things that had a lot of incentives for them too. But it's going to require us really taking our power as the people and reminding these politicians and political elites that we have a say in here. I mean, they wouldn't be spending the millions of dollars to get our vote if our vote didn't matter, right? So we do have power in this equation. Mm-hmm. We're just going to have to start doing the evil thing of talking to people across the line and finding coalitions where we can see a benefit for both of us to change structurally some of these systems and let go of some of that tribalism. I know those are big challenges, but as we were saying earlier, we're seeing some momentum that, people are not wanting to associate with these current parties. So they may be open to looking at other ways of organizing.
Yeah. There was an article from Adam Freelander of Vox writing, "We don't like the two-party system, so why do we have it?" He was saying most Americans feel the major parties don't represent them and say they want more choices, yet few vote for third-party candidates, as you mentioned before. Explanations often blame either voters' reluctance to support third parties or efforts by political and media establishment to suppress third-party candidates and ideas. He was writing that there's a simple explanation. If only one person can win, then you get this winner-takes-all model. If you're American, that sounds utterly reasonable. What the hell other kinds of elections are there? But there are lots of other types. He was saying that winner-takes-all elections, plurality voting, are a practice most advanced economies left behind, and they're keeping the US from more political options. What's your take on where we are in terms of the current state of the two-party system?
Well, I think some of these electoral changes and maybe ranked choice voting, some of these other ways of getting a little bit more representative voting are pathways to start to change some of the worst dynamics of our two-party system. Because like we said before, some of the worst dynamics are this lesser of evil voting. So nobody wants to vote third party because they're afraid they're going to throw their vote away, right? So ranked choice voting is one way to improve that some. We have seen ranked choice voting reduces some of the toxicity, some of the negative campaigning a little bit, because if their person doesn't win, I'm going to need those people, so I can't be too mean to that person, this kind of thinking.
Right.
So you see some of that. So I see those as pathways to improve some of the underlying problems that are more realistic than multiple parties. But again, I could be wrong here. Like I said, that maybe these coalitions start forming and put more pressure on these parties to start changing the rules. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do because it's not really in the Constitution. It's not really, it's not really a government thing even, right? I mean, these parties have managed to get this power like all over the place, a bunch of districts. So you have to change this in like 500 districts in the country to get some of these rules changed. They're changed by state. They're changed by district. It's a big effort to make these structural changes that would have to happen that have kind of built up, over many years.
Yeah.
And Madison talked about parties a lot, right? So he talks about basically the same exact pathology that we've been talking about, right? It's all the things we've been talking about.
It's interesting that you say this isn't in the Constitution because William Cooper, the contributor for the Fulcrum, was saying that the two-party system is what America's founders feared. He cites George Washington, who said he warned against having only two political parties, saying, quote, "The ultimate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, is itself a rightful despotism." Close quote. Washington said rival political parties, quote, "serve to organize faction, to give an artificial and extraordinary force to put in the place of the delegated will of the nation, the will of a party," close quote. And he cites John Adams as well, saying for his part, considered a two-party system a grave threat to the republic, saying, quote, "A division of the republic into two great parties is to be dreaded as the great political evil," close quote. Let's end the show, David, by talking about something that we've kind of been hinting about throughout, which is this piece you sent me from Harmony Labs, and it talks about a democracy audience map. Do you want to explain to the folks kind of what this is and some kind of new ways of thinking about how to group people politically?
Sure, it's a pretty big report. It's combined effort from the Democracy Communications Collaborative and Harmony Labs. I think a lot of it is targeted towards democracy communicators and others in bridge building and other things, how to communicate with these segments. So it has two main sort of attributes for the buckets. They break the country into 8 buckets, so or 8 slices of a circle, and each one is similar to the Pew Research in terms of size, so it's evenly divided amongst the population. And they look at sort of two things, kind of their values and their sort of media consumption and media diets, and what kinds of messages are persuasive to those people. So there's way too much to go into the whole thing, but it breaks people into a few different vectors. One is sort of a us-me kind of side, right? So do I think of more about myself, and do I think more about a group? And then it has some other values. Do people value community? Do they value autonomy? Do they value order? Do they value authority? And so then it starts to combine all those things into a values map. What I like about it is it's not a red-blue divide at all. There's one directional area, you could say that's the closest to red-blue, kind of this one diagonal area. But what's also interesting about it, every time I see somebody talk about this mapping, they seem to only be able to talk about it. Well, is that bucket red or is that bucket blue? It's like, stop
Right.
saying that. Like, think of it a different way.
Yeah,
But
it's hard.
But yeah, we can't get out of it, right?
No, it takes time. It takes time. Behavioral change, structural change, any change, it does take time. We're used to doing things a certain way. This is really clever because not only has it got the kind of left to right, east west, as it says, axis here, approach to participation, challenge on one side, organize on the other, but it's also got this north south axis orientation toward change, transform at the top, and then restore at the bottom. And so because you've got up, down, left, right, it kind of slices it neatly, as you said, into these 8 different pizza slices. So yeah, I thought this is a really interesting way of trying at least to get your mind to think about things differently. Are there any other models that come to mind in terms of what you've seen about how we can think about things differently?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could think about political representation beyond like our classic party labels, right? I mean, some of these are sort of values and attitude based, like that's sort of what Pew is doing. Median values kind of gets added in with the Harmony Labs. And there's others, districts, interest groups, territorial. So there's lots of different ways to look at the country. And I think it's reasonable to think about some of those, right? And then what am I going to do with the data? So that's always something you have to think about too.
Yeah.
So if I know this, what do I do with it, right? So maybe I can be more responsive in some way. Maybe I can change my messaging in some way that will speak, to a certain audience in a way that's persuasive.
Yeah. I'll end with this from Mr. Drutman, one of the authors of the piece, saying reform is always unlikely until it becomes inevitable. Dissatisfaction with and distrust in our political system are at historic highs, and folks are starting to recognize how dangerous the status quo would be. In November, Representatives Marie Gleisenkamp Perez and Jared Golden proposed establishing a select committee to examine electoral reforms, including proportional representation and House expansion as well. Recently, they introduced it as a top priority in Congress. So we'll see where it goes. But a fascinating discussion. David, thank you so much. I think of no one better to have it with me. So thank you so much for joining the show and sharing your thoughts today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope your listeners get some useful information about lots of different things we talked about.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Be sure to check out David's show, the Outrage Overload podcast, wherever you podcast. The link will be in the description, along with the New York Times article we discussed and that quiz, which will show you which political group you would align with. That's from Pew Research Center. Thank you so much to everyone for listening in. If you want to share your thoughts and feelings about American life, society, politics, media, and everything in between, then head to crossingpartylines.com and sign up for one of our meetups and join the community. We'll see everyone in a couple of weeks for another episode of The Conversation, a Crossing Party Lines podcast.